I don't have enough money. The words were only a shade louder than a whisper, yet they cut through Henderson's supermarket like a blade. Grace Mitchell stood at the checkout counter, her cheeks burning hot, her hands trembling as she hugged a carton of milk tight against her chest. Her daughter, Emma, only 4 years old, clung to her mother's leg, her green eyes fixed on the carton of milk, her little lips dry and cracked. Betty, the cashier, let out a tired sigh, already reaching forward to take the milk back. I am sorry, Grace said again, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Let me put it back. That was when someone behind her spoke. Don't. The entire line went still. The man's voice was calm, low, and heavy with authority. The charcoal gray suit on his body was worth more than this whole store. Steel gray eyes that had seen fear bow its head before them. Marcus Blackwood had been watching everything. The carton of milk, the small blonde child, the way the mother turned her face away so her daughter would not see the tears rising up. He stepped forward slowly, and in that moment, no one in the store understood why this powerful man, the man who owned half the city of Boston, was staring at a carton of milk that cost $3. As if it mattered more than anything money could ever buy. Stay with me until the end of the video, because what he does next for that mother and child will leave the whole room silent and change 3 lives forever. If you believe in the power of kindness, tap the heart and share this story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you will not miss stories that touch the heart like this. Now, let us begin. Marcus Blackwood moved toward the checkout counter with steps that were slow yet full of command. Each step seemed to thicken the air inside the supermarket until it felt almost solid. Grace instinctively stepped back once. It was the reflex of a woman who had long learned to keep her distance from powerful men, but he didn't look at her. Those steel gray eyes stopped on the carton of milk in Betty's hands. The carton the cashier was about to set aside. Marcus slipped a hand into the pocket of his suit jacket. And for a brief moment, the whole store seemed to hold its breath. No one knew what this man was about to do. But what he pulled out was not what anyone expected. It was a black leather wallet, old, worn down. The corners rubbed soft with time. It didn't belong with the expensive suit he wore, as if it came from a different life, a different man. Marcus opened it, took out a $100 bill, and set it gently on the counter. The bill lay there, smooth and silent. Yet the sound it made in that room was louder than any thunder. Betty's mouth fell open, her hand still suspended above the carton of milk. She stared at the bill, then up at the man, then back down at the bill, as if her eyes could not be trusted. Pay for everything for her, Marcus said, his voice low and clear. Keep the change. Silence settled over Henderson's market, so thick you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Tyler, the 17-year-old teenager standing behind them with an energy drink in his hand, had lifted his phone without even realizing it. The screen was recording everything, but he didn't notice. His eyes were blurring as tears gathered. An old man at the end of the line, a lonely man with boxes of frozen meals for a dinner meant for one, turned his face away and quickly wiped the corner of his eye with the back of his hand. Grace stood there frozen like a statue. She could not move. She could not speak. She could not even breathe. Her mind refused to process what was happening. $100. That was nearly a full day of grueling labor at the mill. Or more than 5 days' worth of groceries if she was careful. That was 2 weeks of rent. That was food for Emma for an entire month if she stretched it carefully enough. And this stranger had just set it down as if it were nothing at all. Emma looked up at her mother, then over at the tall man in the tailored suit. A 4-year-old child didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel that something important had shifted. The heaviness in the air had eased, and her mother was no longer shaking. Betty was the first to recover. With trembling hands, the 55-year-old cashier began scanning Grace's items again. The steady beep of the scanner sounded through the store's sacred quiet. Bread, peanut butter, pasta, and finally the milk. The carton that cost $349, the one that had almost been taken away. Your total is $18.73, Betty said, her voice unsteady. She took the $100 bill, slipped it into the register, and counted out the change. $8,127. She placed it all into Grace's hands along with the grocery bag and the receipt. But Grace still stood there staring at the money as if it were a miracle. She looked up, her green eyes wet with tears, and met Marcus' steel gray gaze. And in that instant, she saw something that made her heart tighten. Behind the cold, commanding exterior, there was pain. Pain that felt old. Pain that ran deep, as if this man was seeing someone else standing where she stood. Someone he had lost a very long time ago. Grace shook her head, as if she had just woken from a dream. She looked down at the money in her hands, then up at the stranger, and the self-respect she had guarded for so many years rose up in her all at once. She had endured many things in life, but she had never been the kind of woman who accepted charity. Sir, Grace said, her voice trembling, yet trying to stay steady. I can't take this money. It is too much. I can't. She stepped forward, reached out, and tried to give the $81 of change back to Marcus, but he didn't take it. He only stood there. Those steel gray eyes on her with something in his expression Grace could not name. Not pity, not arrogance, understanding, an understanding so deep it felt almost impossible. Coming from a man who was a complete stranger, "Do you know what I see when I look at you standing at that register?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping, nearly a whisper. Grace stayed silent, not knowing what to say. "I see my mother," he said. The words fell between them like stones, heavy and full of meaning. The entire store seemed to stop breathing again. Betty stood behind the counter with her hand pressed to her chest, tears already beginning to roll down her cheeks. Tyler lowered his phone, forgetting he was still recording. The old man at the end of the line turned fully away, his shoulders shaking in quiet waves. "My mother once stood where you are standing," Marcus continued, his voice distant now, as if he were slipping into a memory from long ago, "right here in this store. 30 years ago, when I was only a 6-year-old boy, she stood at the register counting out each coin, trying to figure out whether she had enough to buy milk for me." He paused, and Grace noticed his jaw clench as if he were holding back something fierce that wanted to break through. "She didn't have enough." Marcus went on, his voice lower, "and no one helped her. She had to set the milk down and take me out of the store." His eyes didn't leave Grace. "I remember she turned her face away just like you did a moment ago so I would not see her crying." Something tightened in Grace's throat. She looked at the powerful man standing in front of her, the man who owned half the city of Boston. And for the first time, she didn't see the expensive suit or the cold eyes. She saw a 6-year-old boy beside his mother in a supermarket, thirsty for milk, watching his mother cry. "My mother worked 3 jobs, Marcus continued, his voice sounding like he was telling the story to himself more than to Grace. "Cleaning offices in the morning, waiting tables at a diner at noon, sewing at home at night." He swallowed as if the words had weight. "She slept 4 hours each night. She never complained, not once." He looked straight into Grace's eyes. "She deserved for someone to help her, but no one did. And I swore that if I ever had the power, I would never let another mother stand in front of a choice between her dignity and her child's needs." Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. She looked down at Emma, her little girl still clinging tightly to her leg, wide eyes lifted toward the stranger with curiosity and a kind of awe. "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said, his voice softening. "You don't have to repay me." He let the words settle, gentle, but firm. "The only thing I want is for you to accept this help. Not for me, but for your daughter. Because every child deserves to see her mother smile instead of worry." A long silence passed between them. Grace held Marcus' steel gray gaze. And for the first time in many years, she felt something she thought she had lost for good. Connection, understanding from a stranger, and yet a stranger who somehow understood her pain more than anyone she had ever known. She didn't speak. She only gave a small nod, and that was all Marcus needed. Marcus lowered his gaze, and for the first time, he truly noticed the small child clinging to her mother's leg. Emma stood there, her golden blonde hair slightly messy. Her large green eyes lifted to him with a look that was both curious and shy. Something in Marcus's chest tightened when he saw the child's cracked, dry lips, and the way she kept glancing at the carton of milk in the grocery bag as if afraid it might disappear. He drew in a deep breath, and then slowly he knelt down. The knee of his $3,000 suit touched the old, dusty linoleum floor, and Marcus didn't care. He lowered himself until his eyes were level with Emma's. And at that distance, his face softened in a way no one in the store had ever imagined was possible. "What is your name, little one?" he asked. His voice so gentle it was almost unrecognizable. Emma shrank back, hiding behind her mother's leg, but she still leaned out to look at him. "Emma," she whispered, her voice as small as a mouse. "Emma." Marcus smiled, and that smile changed his whole face. The hard lines on his forehead eased and the steel gray of his eyes lost its chill, catching a warm light he thought he had buried 15 years earlier. "That is a very beautiful name. Do you know what my favorite part of the grocery store is?" Emma shook her head, her wide eyes fixed on him. "The milk aisle," Marcus said, pretending to be serious. "Do you know why? Because milk helps little girls like you grow up strong, smart, and brave. And I think you are going to be all 3. Emma let out a soft giggle. A clear sound that rang through the store's silence like wind chimes on a spring morning. Betty, Tyler, and the old man at the end of the line all felt something inside them grow lighter when they heard that laugh. Even Grace could not stop a smile from forming, though tears still clung to her cheeks. Then Emma suddenly let go of her mother's leg and took one small step forward, standing right in front of Marcus. She tilted her head to one side and looked at him with the kind of gaze only children have. A gaze with no judgment, no fear, only pure curiosity. "Are you an angel?" Emma asked. The question froze Marcus in place. He looked at the 4-year-old child standing before him. And something deep in his chest cracked open. It had been 15 years since his mother died. 15 years of building his empire with ruthlessness and power. 15 years of forgetting what it felt like to have someone look at him without fear, without greed. And now a 4-year-old with cracked lips and messy blonde hair was asking him if he was an angel. Marcus laughed, a real laugh that rose from deep in his chest. A sound that surprised even him as it left his throat. "No, little one," he said, his voice warm and gentle. "I am not an angel. I am just someone who remembers what it feels like to need help." Emma nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. Marcus rose slowly, and when he turned to Grace, his expression was serious again, but no longer cold the way it had been before. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a business card, then handed it to her. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice low enough that only Grace could hear. "Tomorrow morning, go to Callahan Construction on 5th Street. Ask to see James Callahan and tell him Vincent sent you. They need someone to manage scheduling and invoices. Steady pay, hours that work with a small child's school schedule." Grace stared at the card in her hand, then looked up at him with eyes full of doubt. "Why?" she asked, her voice rough. "You don't even know who I am. Why are you doing all of this?" Marcus studied her for a long moment, then glanced down at Emma, the 4-year-old holding her mother's leg again, watching him with clear, unguarded eyes. "Because every mother deserves to sleep peacefully," he said, "knowing that tomorrow will be taken care of." He let the words settle. 9 in the morning. Don't be late. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Grace standing there with the business card trembling in her hand and a fragile thread of hope for the first time in so many dark years, beginning to glow inside her heart. 24 hours before that fateful moment at Henderson's supermarket, Grace Mitchell was sitting in the manager's office at the Riverside Textile Mill, trying to understand what had just been said to her. The room was small and cramped, lit by flickering fluorescent lights, and it smelled of cold, stale coffee. The manager sat across from her, his face wearing an apologetic look, but his eyes kept sliding away. "Budget cuts," he said, his voice flat, as if he had repeated the same sentence dozens of times that day. "The company is restructuring. Last in means first out. You understand, Grace? This is not about your performance." Grace sat there with her hands on her lap. Her fingers clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. She had worked here for 2 years. 2 years of standing 12 hours a day beside roaring looms. 2 years of breathing fabric dust until her lungs burned every night. 2 years of pushing through exhausting shifts just to bring home $14 an hour with no health insurance, no paid time off. And now it ended with a pink envelope and 2 weeks of severance. $1,344. That was all 2 years of her labor was worth. She took the envelope with hands that felt numb, stood up, and walked out of the office without a word. She passed the familiar row of weaving machines where her coworkers were still working. Some looked at her with sympathy. Some lowered their heads and avoided her as if her bad luck might be contagious. She pushed the door open and stepped outside. The October afternoon sun hit her eyes, bright and unforgiving. The employee parking lot was nearly empty. Her 2009 Honda Civic sat in the farthest corner. The silver paint dulled by time. A dent on the driver's side door she could not afford to fix. Grace opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and shut the door. Then she just sat there. For the first 10 minutes, she did nothing at all. She stared straight ahead at the gray brick wall of the factory, the place she would never return to again. Then it hit like a tidal wave she could not stop. Despair surged up from deep in her chest and spilled out through sobs. Grace folded over the steering wheel and cried. She cried for the job she had just lost. She cried for the bills she had not paid. She cried for the rent that would be due in 2 weeks. She cried for Emma, her little girl, her 4-year-old, who didn't know her mother had just lost her only source of income. She cried until her chest ached, until there were no tears left to cry. By the time Grace drove back to her tiny studio apartment, the sky was already slipping into dusk. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an aging building in a neighborhood that was not exactly safe, where $850 a month was the lowest rent she had been able to find. Mrs. Patterson, the kind 65-year-old neighbor, had watched Emma all day. When Grace picked her daughter up, she tried to smile and kissed Emma's forehead as if nothing had happened. Emma wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, her sweet breath warm against Grace's cheek. "Mom, I am hungry," Emma said, her voice clear and innocent. "Can I have dinner now?" Grace carried her into the kitchen, settled Emma into her usual chair at the small wooden table, and opened the refrigerator. The light from the small bulb inside washed over her face, and Grace saw what she had tried not to think about all day. The refrigerator was almost empty. Half a jar of peanut butter, 2 slices of bread, a little wilted produce, and no milk. Not a drop of milk left for Emma. A child who needed calcium to grow. A child who had drunk milk every day since she was weaned. "Mom," Emma called from behind her. "Where is my milk? I am thirsty." Grace stood there with one hand on the refrigerator door, her eyes fixed on the empty space inside. She took a deep breath, swallowed the lump in her throat, and turned back to her daughter with a strained smile. "Tomorrow I will buy you milk, my sweet Emma," she said. "I promise." That night, after Emma had fallen fast asleep, Grace sat alone on the worn-out sofa, staring into the darkness and doing the math. $1,712. That was all the cash left in her wallet. Rent was due in 2 weeks. The electric bill still sat unopened on the kitchen table. Emma's doctor appointment was on Friday, and the little girl needed milk. Grace could not sleep that night. She lay in bed with her eyes wide open, staring at the peeling ceiling, wondering what she would do next. She thought about driving to the interview, but the Honda's tank was bone dry, and she didn't have a single dollar to spare for gas. The bus was her only option. She didn't know that in less than 24 hours her life would change completely because of a carton of milk that cost $349 and a stranger in a supermarket. Grace Mitchell's life had never been easy. If someone asked her about her childhood, she would not know where to begin. Because the happy memories were too few, too faint compared to the scars fate had carved into her spirit. Her mother died when Grace was only 7 years old. Breast cancer, a cruel disease that took the gentlest woman Grace had ever known in just 6 months from the day of diagnosis. Grace still remembered the last day with her mother in the hospital, as clearly as if it were happening now. The way her mother held her hand with fingers that were thin and pale. The way her mother's voice fell to a weak whisper. "Be strong, Grace. Always be strong, no matter what happens." Grace tried to be strong. She tried for the past 20 years, but sometimes even strength has its limits. After her mother died, her father changed completely. He turned to alcohol as a way to run from the pain of losing his wife. And the more he drank, the farther away he became from his daughter. Grace remembered the nights she lay curled up in her room, listening to bottles striking the wall and curses bursting from the living room. She remembered the way her father looked at her with empty eyes, as if she were a stranger, as if she didn't exist. Then one morning, when Grace was 10, she woke up and found that her father was gone. He left without a note, without a call, without a single sign that he had ever cared about the small daughter he had left behind. Grace was sent to live with her grandmother, a widowed woman in a small house on the outskirts of Boston. Her grandmother loved Grace with her whole heart. And for the next 7 years, she became her mother, her father, and her closest friend. She taught Grace how to cook. She taught her how to sew. She taught her that no matter how hard life became, there was always hope. But fate struck Grace again, landing a blow she didn't see coming. Her grandmother died of old age when Grace was only 17, just a few months before she graduated high school. Once again, Grace was left alone in the world. No family, no relatives, no one to lean on. She had to take care of herself through her final year of high school, studying while working part-time at fast food restaurants just to keep life going. When Grace met Ryan Peters at 21, she thought life had finally decided to smile on her. Ryan was handsome, funny, and he knew exactly how to make her feel loved. They married after only 6 months of dating, and Grace became pregnant with Emma soon after the wedding. In those first months, she believed she finally had the family she had always longed for. But Grace was wrong. Ryan had a secret he kept hidden until it was too late. He was addicted to gambling. The nights he said he was working extra hours were really nights spent in backroom casinos, betting money they didn't have. When Grace was 7 months pregnant, she discovered the truth when debt collectors came knocking at their apartment door. Ryan had borrowed $47,000 from unofficial sources. And all of that debt was in Grace's name because he had forged her signature. That night, when Grace confronted her husband, Ryan hit her. He punched her in the face. He shoved her to the floor. Then he walked out the door and didn't look back. Grace lay there, one hand holding her pregnant belly, the other covering the bruise on her face. And she cried until there were no tears left. Ryan disappeared when Emma was only 6 months old, leaving Grace with a mountain of debt and a small child who needed care. For the past 3 years, Grace had worked without stopping to pay it down. The original $47,000 had fallen to $31,000, but with a wage of $14 an hour, she knew it would take many more years before she could climb out of this financial pit. And now with her job gone, with the refrigerator empty and her daughter needing milk, Grace felt as if fate was testing her all over again. But she didn't know that night when she walked into Henderson's supermarket with $1,712 in her wallet. Her life was about to turn in a direction she could not yet imagine. At the same time, Grace lay awake on her bed in her shabby studio apartment, dozens of miles away. Marcus Blackwood stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass wall of his penthouse on the 47th floor, looking down at the city of Boston, spread beneath him like a carpet of light. His penthouse was more than 500 square meters, designed in a minimalist style, filled with the most expensive furnishings money could buy. Polished white Italian marble floors, contemporary artworks worth hundreds of thousands of dollars hanging on the walls, a crystal chandelier from France casting a gentle glow across the vast living room. But no matter how beautiful and extravagant it was, the penthouse always carried a strange coldness. No family photographs on the shelves, no personal traces that suggested anyone truly lived here. It felt more like a gallery than a home, and Marcus liked it that way, or at least he had convinced himself that he did. Behind him, Frank Torres stood with a tense expression. The report in his hands trembling, even though the 42-year-old man had followed Marcus for more than 15 years, and had never shaken in fear before anyone, but the news he had brought was not good. Salerno made his move. Frank said, his voice low and grave. He took the Eastport this morning. 3 of our partners have switched sides. 6 months of your planning, and with 3 phone calls, it all collapsed. Marcus didn't turn around. He kept staring out at the city, his steel-gray eyes cold as ice. Victor Salerno. The name was like a blade slicing through his mind. A 45-year-old man with the smile of a venomous snake. A man who had been eyeing Marcus' position for years. And now, at last, he had found the courage to strike. What do you want me to do? Frank asked. We can hit back tonight. I have people ready. Marcus was silent for a long time. In his head, thousands of scenarios were running. Thousands of moves he could make. He had built this empire with ruthlessness and intelligence, and he knew he could crush Cerno if he wanted to. But tonight, he didn't want to think about any of it. Tonight, something in him felt tired. Tired down to the bone. Tomorrow, Marcus said, and his voice weakened in a way that surprised even him. I need to think. Frank's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but he didn't dare argue. He only nodded and backed out of the room, leaving Marcus alone with the darkness and the city lights. Marcus stood there for a long while longer, and then suddenly he made a decision he didn't fully understand himself. He needed to walk. He needed to get out of this suffocating penthouse away from reports and plots and strategy. He needed to remember what the real world looked like. The world of ordinary people with ordinary worries. He grabbed his coat, stepped into the elevator, and told the driver waiting in the lobby that he wanted to walk alone. His security team followed silently from a distance. Ghosts in expensive shoes. The cool October night wrapped around him as he stepped outside. Marcus walked through familiar streets, streets he had grown up on before money and power changed everything. And then, as if guided by an invisible force, his steps brought him to the entrance of Henderson's Market. That small store was still there, unchanged after 30 years, like a living fragment of the past. And when Marcus walked inside, he didn't know he was stepping into a moment that would change his life forever. When Marcus stepped through the automatic doors of Henderson's supermarket, the familiar smell of brewed coffee and fresh bread rushed into his nose. And all at once, he was no longer the powerful boss who owned half the city of Boston. He was a thin 6-year-old boy, gripping his mother's hand, walking between towering aisles. Memories surged back like a wave that could not be stopped. 30 years earlier, in this very store, Catherine Blackwood had brought her little son shopping after another day of grinding exhaustion. She wore an old wool coat, the threads frayed at the cuffs, shoes so worn, the soles were nearly gone, and her eyes always carried dark shadows from too many sleepless nights. But when she looked at Marcus, her smile was always bright, as if the boy were all the light she needed in her difficult life. Catherine worked 3 jobs to support the 2 of them. In the mornings, she cleaned offices downtown from 5 o'clock until 9. At noon and through the afternoon, she waited tables at a small diner 20 minutes from home on foot. And at night, when Marcus was asleep, she sat beside an old sewing machine, mending and stitching clothes for neighbors just to earn a few extra dollars. She slept 4 hours a night, sometimes less, and she never complained. Marcus remembered one night when he was about 8 years old, waking up thirsty and walking into the living room. He saw his mother at the kitchen table, her head bowed over stacks of bills, her shoulders trembling in quiet waves. She was crying silently, so she would not wake her son. Marcus stood there in the darkness watching her, and for the first time in his life he understood the weight she was carrying. He had sworn to himself that one day he would make sure his mother would never have to cry over money again. But life didn't give him that chance. Catherine Blackwood died from exhaustion when Marcus was 21. She collapsed right there in the diner where she worked, and she never woke up again. The doctor said her heart had worked too hard for too many years, and at last it simply gave out. Marcus had stood by her hospital bed when she took her final breath. She held his hand with fingers that were thin and cold. Her eyes filled with every ounce of love she had. "Be better than what I was able to give you," she whispered. Her voice so weak, Marcus had to lean close to hear it. "Live a life that makes me proud." Then she closed her eyes, and Catherine Blackwood was gone forever, leaving Marcus alone in the world she had tried to protect him from for 21 years. Her funeral took place on a cold, rainy afternoon. Only a few neighbors and former coworkers came. No lavish flowers, no expensive casket, only a simple wooden box, and a small grave in a cemetery outside the city. Marcus stood by his mother's grave after everyone had left, rain soaking through his shoulders, and he made a vow. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with grief, yet steady with resolve. "I swear I will never let anyone in my family choose between dignity and survival the way you had to. I will build a world where people like you don't have to cry in the dark over bills they can't pay." And Marcus kept that promise. He built his empire from nothing, with ruthlessness, with intelligence, with an iron will nothing could bend. He became the most powerful man in the city. The man both politicians and the underworld treated with wary respect. But somewhere along that road, he forgot the true meaning of the promise he made long ago. Until tonight, until he walked into Henderson's supermarket and saw Grace Mitchell standing at the checkout counter. A young woman with cheeks red from shame, hands trembling around a carton of milk, and a small daughter clinging tight to her mother's leg. Just like Catherine and Marcus 30 years earlier. And in that moment, Marcus Blackwood remembered who he had once been and why he had started any of this in the first place. Grace woke at 5:30 in the morning before the alarm clock even rang. She lay in bed for a long time, staring up at the peeling ceiling, wondering if what happened last night had been a dream. But when she reached toward the nightstand and touched the business card Marcus had given her, she knew it was real. Callahan Construction, 5th Street, 9 in the morning. "Don't be late." The words of that mysterious man echoed in her mind like a promise. And for the first time in years, Grace felt something warm spread through her chest. Hope. She got up carefully so she would not wake Emma, who was sleeping soundly in the small bed beside hers. The little girl hugged a threadbare teddy bear Grace had bought at a thrift store, her face peaceful and innocent in sleep. Grace bent down, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered, "I will change our life, my love. I promise." She stepped into the cramped bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. The face looking back at her was tired and drawn. The dark circles beneath her eyes proof of so many nights lost to worry. But this morning, something was different in her green eyes. A small light, steady and stubborn, like a flame that had just been lit after a long, bleak winter. Grace showered quickly and began to get ready. She opened her narrow closet and studied the few outfits she owned, trying to find something suitable for a job interview. In the end, she chose a navy blue dress she had bought at a thrift store 2 years ago. It was a little loose now, because she had grown thinner in recent months, but it was still neat, still held its shape. She pulled it on, brushed her hair smooth, and tied it back, then fastened the pearl necklace her grandmother had left her. It was the only piece of jewelry of real value she owned. And there had been times she had thought about selling it in her hardest moments. But every time her fingers touched those small pearls, she could hear her grandmother's voice whispering in her ear, "Keep it, sweetheart. This is my good luck. Left for you." And she had kept it. This morning, she wore it like a charm. By 7, Grace woke Emma, fed her breakfast with bread spread with peanut butter and a glass of fresh milk, the milk Marcus had bought for them the night before. Emma drank happily, her eyes bright with joy, and Grace felt her throat tighten with gratitude. She walked Emma to the apartment next door, where Mrs. Patterson had agreed to watch her for the morning. The 65-year-old woman with white silver hair and gentle eyes opened the door with a warm smile. "Good luck, my girl," Mrs. Patterson said, taking Grace's hand and giving it a soft squeeze. "I believe you can do it." Grace thanked her, kissed Emma goodbye one more time, then went down the stairs with her heart pounding out of rhythm. As she stood at the bus stop, waiting for the bus that would take her to 5th Street, she looked down at the business card in her hand again, Callahan Construction. She, Clear's throat, didn't know who the mysterious man named Vincent truly was, or why he had helped her, but she knew this was a chance she could not afford to miss. And she would do everything she could to hold on to it. Callahan Construction sat inside a converted warehouse in an industrial district of Boston that was slowly beginning to change when Grace stepped off the bus at 8:45 in the morning. She stood still for a long moment, staring at the building in front of her. This was nothing like what she had imagined. Trucks loaded with construction materials moved in and out without pause. Workers in hard hats crossed the grounds in every direction, busy but organized. The steady sound of machinery rolled from behind the building, blending with voices calling to one another and engines turning over. This was a real company with real work and a real chance. Grace took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her navy dress, and walked inside. The reception area was clean and professional with framed photographs of completed projects lining the walls, a shopping center, an office building, an upscale residential complex. Each photograph represented hundreds of jobs, hundreds of families being fed. Grace felt a small wave of overwhelm, but she forced herself to stay steady. A woman in her early 30s with friendly eyes sat behind the reception desk and looked up. "Hello. How can I help you?" "I am Grace Mitchell," Grace said, her voice slightly shaky but determined to hold. "I have a 9 o'clock appointment with Mr. Callahan. Vincent sent me." The woman's eyes brightened as if she recognized something. Oh yes, James is expecting you. I am Linda, the receptionist and half the schedule around here. She smiled and stood. Come with me. Linda led Grace down a long hallway lined with more project photos, then stopped at a wooden door. She knocked twice and a low male voice called from inside. Come in. James Callahan's office was practical and plain. Nothing like what Grace had pictured an owner's office would look like. The desk was crowded with blueprints and project schedules. Old hard hats sat on a shelf like souvenirs, and the man who rose to greet her was not what she expected either. James Callahan looked to be about 38, with the calloused hands of someone who had worked with his own two hands, and paint-spattered shoes that suggested he still spent plenty of time at job sites. He smiled and held out his hand. Miss Mitchell, Vincent told me about you. Please have a seat. Grace shook his hand and sat in the chair across from his desk. Her heart was pounding so hard she was afraid he could hear it. James sat down and studied her with an expression that held no judgment, only curiosity and careful attention. So he said, tell me about yourself. Grace had prepared perfect answers in her head, the kind of answers she had read online about how to impress someone in an interview. But sitting here across from a man with eyes this honest, she decided to tell the truth. I am a single mother, Grace began, her voice trembling lightly before it steadied. I lost my job at the textile mill the day before yesterday, she swallowed. I have been working since I was 16. I have taken care of myself and I have gone to school while working. I am good with numbers, organized, and reliable. I am always on time, and I work harder than most people because I have to. I have a 4-year-old daughter named Emma, and she is the reason I get up every morning. She stopped, meeting James's eyes. I need this job, not because I deserve pity, but because I am willing to do whatever it takes to prove you will not regret giving me a chance. A long silence passed. James looked at her thoughtful, then nodded slowly. Vincent is not a man who asks favors easily, he said. When he called and said someone needed help, I knew it had to be someone special. He leaned forward. But I don't hire out of pity. The work here is real, and it demands real ability. We manage 8 different job sites, dozens of subcontractors, and hundreds of workers. You would be handling schedules, invoices, permits with the city, and more daily problems than you can count. Grace nodded, never taking her eyes off him. I clears throat, understand, and I am ready to learn. James watched her for another moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. You know, I have been in this business for 25 years, and I can recognize capability within the first 5 minutes. You walked in here afraid, but you still looked me in the eye. You talked about your daughter as your reason to push forward, not as a burden. Those are the qualities I need. He pulled a folder from a drawer and set it in front of Grace. The job starts at a salary of $42,000 a year, plus full health insurance, 2 weeks of paid vacation. Sick time is needed, and we close from Christmas to New Year's. Hours are 8 in the morning to 5 o'clock in the evening, but we are flexible when family things happen. Can you start on Monday? Grace looked at him, then down at the folder, then back at him. She could not speak because her throat had tightened with emotion. $42,000, health insurance, paid time off. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. Yes, she finally whispered, tears rising in her eyes. Yes, I can start on Monday. Grace's first week at Callahan Construction passed like a dream she didn't want to wake from. On Monday morning, she arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes early, and Linda was already waiting in the lobby with a hot cup of coffee and a warm smile. First days are always the most stressful, Linda said as she led Grace to her desk. But trust me, you will get used to it. Everyone here is really easy to be around. And Linda was right. Grace's new coworkers welcomed her with genuine kindness. Tom, the logistics coordinator, patiently explained the material shipping system to her. Sarah from accounting spent the entire lunch hour teaching her how to use the invoice management software. And James Callahan, even though he was buried in dozens of meetings each day, still stopped by her desk now and then to ask if everything was going all right. Grace learned fast. Years of managing a household budget with almost nothing had trained her into excellent organization and sharp, practical math. By the end of Tuesday, she understood the basics of the scheduling system for 8 job sites. By Thursday, she was handling smaller invoices on her own without anyone watching over her shoulder. Linda watched her work with an impressed look and told James, she is the fastest learner I have ever seen. But what made Grace happiest was not the smooth work days or the kind coworkers. It was Emma. With new health insurance and a steady paycheck, Grace could finally enroll her daughter in a better preschool, one with a wide playground and well-trained teachers. On Emma's first morning at the new school, she clutched her mother's hand with nervous fingers. But only a few hours later, when Grace came to pick her up, she saw Emma laughing with other children, her green eyes bright with happiness. Mom, I made a new friend, Emma shouted as she ran to Grace. Sophie, she likes princesses, too, just like me. Grace pulled her daughter into her arms and felt her eyes sting. This was what she had wanted for so long, a normal life where her daughter could be a normal child with normal joys. Their daily life began to change in small ways that still felt enormous. The refrigerator was no longer empty. Grace could buy fresh milk for Emma each week without counting every cent. She even bought her little girl a new pair of shoes, the first pair that didn't come secondhand from a charity shop. And at night, Grace could sleep. For the first time in years, she didn't lie awake worrying about rent or the electric bill. She slept deeply, peacefully, knowing tomorrow would be handled. On the evening of the first weekend, after dinner and a bedtime story for Emma, Grace sat alone on the old sofa and looked out the window. Boston shimmered with lights outside and she thought about the mysterious man who had changed her life. Vincent, or Marcus as she would later learn his real name. She didn't understand why he had helped her, a complete stranger in a supermarket. But she knew she owed him more than words could ever hold. And she made a promise to herself that one day when she had the power, she would pass that kindness forward to someone else. Just as he had said, "You don't repay me. You pass it on." Tyler Morrison, the 17-year-old teenager with an energy drink in his hand that night at Henderson's supermarket, never imagined the video he recorded on his phone would change the lives of so many people. That night, after he got home, he sat and watched the clip again. His eyes still red from emotion, the image of the man in the expensive suit kneeling down to speak with a 4-year-old girl. The way he placed the bill on the counter and spoke words that left the whole store struggling to breathe. Tyler had seen a lot in his life, but he had never seen anything so beautiful. He posted the video on TikTok at 11 that night with a caption that read, "Today I witnessed an angel in a grocery store." He didn't expect much, maybe a few hundred views from friends and people he knew. But when he woke the next morning, his phone had exploded with notifications, 2 million views. Within 12 hours, the video had been shared hundreds of thousands of times, comments flooding in from all over the world. By 48 hours later, the number had jumped to 15 million. The hashtag #MysteryGentleman started trending across the United States, then spread to other countries. People reposted the video with comments full of feeling. "I cried when I watched this. The world needs more people like him. Does anyone know who this man is? I want to thank him on behalf of all the single moms out there." News sites began picking it up. First, the smaller online outlets, then local television stations in Boston, and finally national networks. The mystery man in the supermarket. A story of kindness melting the hearts of millions. That headline appeared on CNN, Fox News, and dozens of other media channels. Reporters poured into Henderson's to interview Betty, the cashier who had witnessed everything. He looked at that carton of milk like it was the whole world. Betty said into the camera, her eyes wet with emotion. He talked about his mother, about how she once stood where that young woman stood. "I have been a cashier for 30 years, and I have never seen anything like it." The video kept spreading at a dizzying speed. People began studying every frame, trying to figure out the identity of the mystery man, the expensive charcoal gray suit, the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, the commanding walk, and the posture of someone used to giving orders. Those small clues didn't escape the eyes of people who knew that world. In Boston's private clubs, in sealed offices where powerful businessmen spoke in low voices, and in the dark rooms of the underworld, a name began to be whispered. Marcus Blackwood. No one said it loudly, but everyone knew. That build, that presence, the way he stood and moved, it could not be mistaken. The most powerful boss in Boston, the man both politicians and criminals treated with wary respect, had appeared in a viral video as if he were a saint, and that left many people unsettled. Marcus Blackwood was not known for public charity. He was not the kind of man who showed weakness in front of the world. So why had he done this? Why had he taken that risk? To ordinary people, the video was simply a beautiful story of kindness. But to those who knew who Marcus Blackwood really was, it was a signal, a sign of change, or perhaps a sign of weakness. And in the world Marcus lived in, weakness was exactly what enemies waited to exploit. Marcus Blackwood's phone didn't stop ringing for 48 hours after the video went viral. He stood in his penthouse, looking down at Boston as the city sank into sunset. And he counted at least 23 calls from associates, 17 messages from business partners, and 1 call from his personal attorney. The voice on the line tight with worry. "Marcus, you need to explain to me what is happening." The attorney said through the phone, "This video is everywhere. People are trying to identify you. This is not the kind of attention we want." Marcus didn't answer. He only stared out the window and thought about a carton of milk that cost $3. He thought about the green eyes of a 4-year-old child. He thought about the innocent question that had softened him in a place he didn't realize could still break open. "Are you an angel?" He didn't regret what he had done, but he knew consequences were coming, and they were coming faster than he had expected. A few miles away, in an office building with no sign out front in downtown Boston, Special Agent Daniel Cooper of the FBI sat in front of a computer screen, watching the viral video again and again for the 27th time. Cooper was 40 with salt and pepper hair and the sharp eyes of a man who had spent 18 months tracking Marcus Blackwood's every movement. He had gathered thousands of pages of documents, hundreds of hours of recordings, and more hidden photographs than he could count. He knew where Marcus went, who he met, and who he did business with. But this video didn't fit anything he thought he knew about the man. Strange, Cooper murmured, rewinding again, freezing the frame where Marcus was kneeling to speak to the child. A younger agent beside him, Martinez, leaned in toward the screen. "What do you think this is?" Martinez asked. "A public relations stunt?" Cooper shook his head, slow and certain. "No, look at his eyes. Look at how he kneels without caring about the expensive suit. Look at how he talks to the child. This is not acting. This is real." Martinez frowned. "So what are you saying? That our mafia boss is actually a good man?" "I am saying people are more complicated than we want to believe," Cooper said, leaning back and rubbing his temples. "We have been watching Marcus Blackwood for 18 months. We have evidence of suspicious business activity, ties to underworld figures, and a lot of financial transactions that don't add up. But we have never seen him personally do anything illegal." He pointed to the screen. "And now this. 15 million people are watching Marcus Blackwood like he is a saint. If we make an arrest now, the public will turn against us." Martinez let out a slow breath. "So what do we do?" Cooper went quiet for a long moment, his eyes still locked on the screen on the image of Marcus placing a $100 bill on the checkout counter. "We dig deeper," he said at last. "This video shows a new side of Blackwood. Maybe there are other sides we have not seen. Find out who the woman in the video is. Find the connection between her and Blackwood. And most important, watch how his enemies react." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city as the lights began to come on. "This video has exposed Blackwood to the public. It could be the weakness we need, or it could be the weakness his enemies exploit before we have the chance to move." And Cooper was right. Somewhere else in the city, inside a luxurious mansion in the suburbs, a 45-year-old man with the smile of a venomous snake watched the same video. Victor Cerno took a sip of expensive whiskey and let out a cold, satisfied laugh. Marcus Blackwood, the man who could not be defeated, had finally shown an opening, and Cerno was not going to let it pass. Marcus' phone rang at 10 at night, and when he looked at the screen, a name appeared that made his steel-gray eyes turn a shade colder. Victor Salerno. He knew this call was coming. He just didn't think it would come this fast. Marcus answered, but he didn't speak. He stayed silent, waiting. Salerno's voice slid through the line, slick as oil and poisonous as venom. "Marcus, my old friend, it has been a long time. I hope you are doing well." Marcus didn't return the fake warmth. "What do you want, Salerno?" A soft laugh came back. A sound like glass breaking. Direct as always. "That is what I have always admired about you, Marcus. No detours, no decoration, but today I am calling about a very interesting video I just watched. I imagine you have heard about it by now." Marcus tightened his grip on the phone, but his voice stayed calm, like the surface of an autumn lake. "I don't have time for your games." "Oh, but this is not a game," Cerno replied, his tone snapping from cheerful to cold in a single heartbeat. "This is reality. 15 million people have watched you kneel in a cheap supermarket, buying milk for a single mother you don't even know. Very moving, Marcus. Very human. But do you know what people in our world think when they watch that video?" Marcus said nothing. And Salerno continued, satisfaction curling through his words. "They think you are getting soft. They think Marcus Blackwood, the most feared boss in Boston, has lost his fangs. They think maybe it is time for a new leader, someone who does not let emotion cloud his judgment." The last line landed like a public declaration of war. And Marcus knew it. He walked to the window and looked down at Boston spread below him, the city where he had built an empire from nothing. "Are you threatening me, Cerno?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper, each word heavy as lead. "Threatening? No, no," Cerno said with a thin mocking laugh. "I am only sharing my observation. You see, I have waited a very long time for this moment. For years, you have stood at the top, looking down on all of us like ants. But now, it is different. That video showed the world a new Marcus Blackwood. A Marcus Blackwood who can cry, who can feel mercy, who can kneel in front of a 4-year-old child." He paused, then his voice turned to ice. "And in our world, a man who can kneel is a man who can be beaten." Marcus felt anger boil up in his chest, but he held it down. He had learned long ago that uncontrolled anger was the shortest road to defeat. "You are making a very big mistake, Salerno," Marcus said, his calmness almost frightening. "You are confusing kindness with weakness. They are not the same." "Maybe," Cerno answered. "Or maybe you are lying to yourself." He let the words hang, then continued. "Either way, I only wanted you to know that things will change from now on. The Eastport was only the beginning. In the next few weeks, you will watch more slip through your fingers, and when it is over, this city will have a new boss." Marcus didn't respond right away. He let the silence stretch, heavy and threatening. Then he spoke, his voice like cold steel. "Do you know why I am still standing where I am after all these years, Salerno? It is not because I am the most ruthless or the strongest. It is because I know how to wait. I know how to watch and I know when to strike." He paused, then lowered his voice to a near whisper. "You just declared war on me. Fine, but remember this. In every war, the one who throws the first punch is not always the one who wins. And when I answer, you will not have the chance to regret it." Then he ended the call, giving Salerno no chance to say another word. Marcus stood in the darkness of his penthouse, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the sleeping city beyond the glass. The war had begun, and he knew it was not only his empire that was under threat. Now, a young woman and her 4-year-old daughter might become targets, too. The next morning, Frank Torres walked into Marcus' penthouse with a face tighter than Grace had ever seen on him. The 42-year-old man had been at Marcus' side for 15 years. He had watched every rise and fall of this empire, and he had never looked as worried as he did now. Marcus stood by the window with a cup of black coffee in his hand, steel-gray eyes fixed on Boston as it woke beneath the pale light of dawn. He didn't turn when he heard Frank's footsteps, but he already knew it was bad news. "Say it," Marcus said, his voice low and worn. After a sleepless night, Frank drew a deep breath before he spoke. "Salerno is looking for the woman in the video." Marcus's body went still. The coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. He still didn't turn, but his voice dropped another shade. "Go on." "He sent people to Henderson's yesterday," Frank said, his tone heavy. "They questioned Betty, the cashier, about the young woman in the video. Betty didn't say anything, but they got clearer images from the store's security cameras. According to my source, they have identified her as Grace Mitchell, 27, a single mother currently working at Callahan Construction." Marcus, clear's throat, set the coffee down on the window ledge. When he finally turned, his eyes had darkened like a sky before a storm. "Do they know where she lives?" "Not yet, but it is only a matter of time," Frank said. "I put people watching her apartment starting last night, and I sent 2 more near Callahan Construction. But if Cerno is determined, he will find her." Marcus stood without moving. And in that moment, Frank saw something he rarely saw on his boss's face. Torment. Guilt. Marcus Blackwood, the man who could make life and death decisions without flinching, was suffering over a woman he had met only once in a supermarket. "This is my fault," Marcus said, his voice rough and low. "She didn't think wrong. She was just a mother trying to buy milk for her daughter. And now she is in danger because I could not control myself for one moment." Frank stayed quiet. He knew Marcus didn't need comfort or excuses. He needed a solution. "We can move her somewhere safe," Frank offered. "A secure house outside the city, somewhere Salerno can't find." But Marcus shook his head. "No. If she suddenly disappears, Cerno will know I am protecting her. That only confirms she matters to me, and it will make him even more determined to find her." He walked to the desk, braced both hands on it, and lowered his head, thinking, "If I bring guards close to her, Cerno will see. If I leave her alone, Cerno will get to her. No matter what I do, she is in the crosshairs because I was selfish enough to help her publicly instead of quietly." Frank stepped closer. "Boss, with all due respect, you did the right thing in that supermarket. You helped someone who needed help. That is not selfishness. It is recklessness." Marcus snapped back. "I know who I am. I know the world I live in, and I know that anyone tied to me can become a target. But in that moment, I forgot all of it. I only saw my mother at that register 30 years ago, and I acted without thinking about the consequences." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Marcus lifted his head, and there was a new resolve in his steel-gray eyes. "Pull them back," he said. "All security around her. Pull them all back." Frank stared at him. "Boss, you can't be serious." "I am completely serious." Marcus cut in. "If Cerno sees security, he will know she is my weakness. We need another way to protect her without showing she matters." He went quiet, then spoke again. "I will meet her in person. I will warn her about the danger without explaining too much. And I will give her a way to contact us if something happens." Frank nodded slowly, though his concern remained. "And Cerno?" Marcus looked back out the window, his eyes cold as tempered steel. "Cerno chose the wrong enemy, and he will learn that soon enough." That afternoon, as the last sunlight of the day faded over the worn rooftops of the working-class neighborhood, Marcus Blackwood stood in the shadows of an alley across from Grace Mitchell's apartment building. He had been there nearly 30 minutes, watching the foot traffic, the cars lined along the street and the front door of the building. No sign of Salerno's men, at least not yet. He drew a deep breath, stepped out of the darkness, and crossed the street. By the time Marcus reached the third-floor door and knocked, he didn't know what he was going to say. How do you explain to an ordinary woman that she is in danger because a stranger bought her milk in a supermarket? How do you tell her that her life could be threatened by people she has never even known exist? The door opened and Grace stood there, her green eyes wide with surprise as she recognized the man in front of her. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her brown hair loose over her shoulders, and her face held confusion tangled with shock. You are, she stammered, not knowing what to call him. Vincent, the name he had used, or the mystery man from the store. Marcus, he said softly. My real name is Marcus Blackwood. I need to talk to you, Grace. May I come in? Grace hesitated for a second, then nodded and stepped aside. The apartment was small and plain, but clean and warm. Children's scribbled drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A threadbare teddy bear lay on the sofa, and in the corner of the room, a pair of small green eyes watched him with curiosity. Mom, is someone here? Emma asked, her head tilted. Then her eyes lit up like stars when she recognized the tall man in the dark suit. The angel man? Emma cried and ran toward Marcus so fast she almost tripped. She ran straight into his legs, her small arms wrapping around him as if she were afraid he might disappear. Marcus stood there frozen. He had faced the most dangerous criminals in the city without shaking. He had made decisions that could change the fate of thousands without blinking. But a hug from a 4-year-old child left him completely unmanned slowly, as if afraid he might break something precious. Marcus knelt down and rested one hand on Emma's back. Emma looked up at him with clear, trusting eyes. No fear, no doubt, only the absolute faith of a child. Did you come to visit me? Emma asked, her voice bright and happy. I missed you. I still drink milk every day like you said. I am growing up strong and smart and brave. Something inside Marcus broke open. His eyes stung and it took him a few seconds to find his voice again. I know, sweetheart. I am very proud of you. Grace watched, one hand pressed to her chest, and she felt tears rise in her own eyes. The powerful man she had glimpsed in the supermarket. The man in the expensive suit and the eyes cold as steel was now kneeling on the floor of her small apartment, holding her daughter with a tenderness she had never seen in any man. Marcus rose, but Emma still clung to his hand, refusing to let go. He looked at Grace and his face turned serious. Grace, I came because there is something important I need to tell you. Grace nodded, though her heart began to race with an uneasy sense of warning. Emma, sweetheart, can you go play with your teddy bear for a little while? Grace said gently. Emma looked at her mother, then at Marcus, then reluctantly let go and ran into the small bedroom in the corner of the apartment. When the door closed, Marcus spoke quickly. Urgent now. The supermarket video spread farther than I expected. There are people trying to find out who you are, and they are not good people. I can't explain everything, but you need to be careful. If anyone approaches you and asks about me, don't say anything. He pulled out a business card and placed it into Grace's hand. Call this number if you feel anything is off. Anytime, day or night, someone will come to you immediately. Grace looked down at the card, then up at him, her eyes full of fear. Who are you really, Marcus? I need to know. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke in a voice low and heavy with sorrow. I am the man who accidentally put you in danger, and I will do everything I can to fix that mistake. 3 days after her meeting with Marcus, Grace stepped out of the Callahan construction building at 5 in the evening, just like she always did. She had just finished a busy workday filled with dozens of invoices to process and schedules for 4 job sites that needed to be rearranged. Her mind was still circling what Marcus had told her, the strange warning, and the business card she now kept in her pocket at all times. She wanted to believe he was only being overly cautious, that her ordinary life could not possibly be tied to anything dangerous. But when she reached the familiar bus stop, she noticed 2 men leaning against a black sedan parked right along the curb. Leather jackets, hard, cold faces, and both of them were staring straight at her. A chill ran up Grace's spine. She tried to walk faster, pretending she had not seen them, but one of the men stepped out and blocked her path. Miss Mitchell, right? He asked, his voice low and threatening. We want to talk to you about your friend, the man in that supermarket video. Grace's heart hammered in her chest. She took a step back, her eyes darting quickly to either side, searching for help. But the sidewalk was nearly empty at this hour, and the cars passing on the street seemed to pay no attention to her at all. I don't know what you are talking about, Grace said, trying to keep her voice calm even as her hands shook. I am sorry. I have to pick up my child. She tried to step around them, but the second man moved fast and cut her off. He grabbed her arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to make it clear she would not get away easily. We only want to ask a few questions, he said, a smile on his lips as cold as ice. Mr. Cerno would really like to know more about the man who helped you in the store. What is his real name? Where does he live? Do you have a way to contact him, Salerno? The name made Grace remember Marcus' serious face when he warned her. There are people trying to find out who you are, and they are not good people. Now she understood exactly who he meant. I truly don't know anything, Grace said, forcing her voice not to shake. I had never met him before that night. And I don't know who he is. The man holding her arm tightened his grip a little. You are lying. We know he came to your apartment 3 days ago. Don't play with us, Miss Mitchell. We are not patient people. Grace felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. They had been watching her. They knew where she lived. They knew Marcus had come to see her. She and Emma were not safe anymore. In one lightning-fast motion, Grace yanked her arm free and shoved her hand into her pocket. Her fingers hit the business card Marcus had given her, and she pulled out her phone, dialing as she backed away a few steps. The two men advanced on her, but she had already hit call. The phone rang once, twice, then a low voice answered. I am outside Callahan Construction, Grace said quickly, her voice shaking. There are 2 men. They are asking about Marcus. They will not let me leave. She didn't get to say anything else because one of the men snatched the phone out of her hand and threw it to the ground. Big mistake, girl, he growled. But at that exact moment, a black SUV barreled in at terrifying speed and slammed on the brakes right beside them. The door flew open, and Frank Torres stepped out, his broad frame like a wall, his eyes cold and more frightening than anything Grace had ever seen. Salerno's 2 men immediately backed up, their faces shifting when they recognized who stood in front of them. You have 10 seconds to get out of here, Frank said, his voice low as thunder. And tell Cerno that if he touches her one more time, Marcus Blackwood will come to see him personally, and that will be his last meeting. The 2 men didn't need to hear it twice. They dove into the black sedan and sped away like they were being chased by ghosts, leaving Grace standing there, her whole body trembling with fear and relief. Frank stepped toward her, his voice softening. You are safe now, Miss Mitchell. Boss is handling everything. Marcus Blackwood was not the kind of man who waited for an enemy to strike a second time. The moment Frank Torres reported what happened outside Callahan Construction, Marcus set his plan in motion, the one he had been preparing for days. Salerno wanted to play the public opinion game. Fine. Marcus would show him what it meant to be a master of that game. 2 days after Salerno's men approached Grace, a wave of new videos began appearing across social media. Not from one single source, from dozens of different accounts, in different locations, with different stories. The first video came from a construction site security camera showing Marcus Blackwood inspecting safety equipment, stopping to speak with an older worker, then handing the man an envelope. The person who posted it wrote, "He paid my dad's hospital bills after a workplace accident. The insurance company refused to cover it, but Mr. Blackwood didn't hesitate." The second video came from the owner of a small bakery in one of Boston's poorer neighborhoods. An older woman with tearful eyes told her story into a phone camera. The bank was about to take my shop. I borrowed money from loan sharks, and I had no way to repay it. Then one day, a man came and told me Mr. Blackwood had bought my debt. He didn't ask me to pay back a single cent. He only said he wanted this shop to keep serving the community. Dozens of similar videos followed. A veteran helped into a job. An immigrant family protected from extortion. A school in the projects receiving an anonymous donation to repair its crumbling facilities. Every story had one thing in common. Marcus, clear's throat, Blackwood helped them without asking for anything in return. And he never wanted what he did to be public. The hashtag Who is Marcus Blackwood began trending, but this time not with curiosity, with gratitude, with admiration. Public opinion shifted completely. Marcus Blackwood was no longer only the mystery man in the supermarket. He became the symbol of a different kind of power. Power built on respect and gratitude instead of fear. And while the public cheered Marcus, cracks began to form inside Victor Cerno's alliance. The associates Salerno had worked so hard to recruit began pulling back. No one wanted to stand beside the man trying to overthrow someone the entire city now saw as a hero. Are you out of your mind going after Blackwood right now? One of Salerno's closest allies said over the phone. He is a folk hero. If we hit him, we become the enemy of the whole city. Cerno tried to persuade them. He promised. He even threatened. But one by one, his allies turned their backs. The East Port he had seized only weeks earlier suddenly became a burden. When no one dared move shipments for him, business partners cut off contact. Even low-level criminals in his organization started leaving, afraid that staying with Salerno meant standing against Marcus Blackwood. On a cold, rainy night, Cerno's phone rang. He looked at the screen and felt a chill slide down his spine when he saw Marcus Blackwood's number. Salerno. Marcus' voice came through. Calm and cold as ever. I think we should talk. Are you calling to brag? Solo snarled, trying to hide the panic in his voice. No. I am calling to give you one last chance. Marcus paused, then continued. You have lost, Cerno. Not because I am stronger than you or more ruthless than you. You lost because you forgot one simple thing. People remember who helped them when they needed it most. And they never forget who threatened the people they love. Cerno gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. What do you want? Leave Boston, Marcus said. By tomorrow night, if you are still here after that, I will not be this kind anymore. And Salerno, if you touch that woman and that child one more time, I will find you myself. That is not a threat. That is a promise. The call ended. Salerno sat in the darkness of the mansion that had once been the symbol of his power. And for the first time in his life, he felt completely helpless. 24 hours later, Victor Cerno left Boston on a private flight to Miami. He never came back. And somewhere else in the city, FBI Special Agent Daniel Cooper sat in his office staring at the video spreading online, shaking his head in disbelief. Maybe, he murmured to himself. This world is more complicated than I thought. 3 months had passed since that fateful night at Henderson's supermarket, and Grace Mitchell's life had changed in ways she never would have dared to dream. She was no longer the woman trembling at a checkout counter with $17 in her wallet. She had become a stronger, more confident version of herself, a mother who could look toward the future without fear. At Callahan Construction, Grace had been promoted to assistant project manager after only 2 months on the job. One morning, James Callahan called her into his office and told her he had never seen anyone learn so quickly and work so hard. Her new salary was $52,000 a year, along with her own office and the responsibility of supervising 3 other employees. When Grace walked out of James' office that day, she had to go into the bathroom and cry for 10 full minutes simply from happiness. With steady income, Grace could finally leave the cramped, unsafe studio apartment where she and Emma had lived for 3 years. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a quieter, more secure neighborhood with a playground for children right outside and friendly neighbors. For the first time in her life, Emma had a bedroom of her own, a pink princess bed she had wished for. For so long, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, so she could look up at them each night before she fell asleep. Emma had grown so much in those 3 months. She drank milk every day, just as she had promised the angel man, and the pediatrician praised her for developing well and meeting every milestone. She had new friends at preschool. She could count to 100, and she had begun learning to read simple words. Every night, Grace read stories to her daughter before bed, and it was the most precious part of her day. At last, life was smiling on them. One clear's throat, Saturday afternoon, Grace brought Emma back to Henderson's supermarket for their weekly shopping. She could have gone anywhere else, someplace larger and newer. But she kept choosing to come here. This was where her life had changed, and she wanted to remember that each time she stepped through those familiar automatic doors. Betty still worked there, and she always wore a radiant smile whenever she saw Grace and Emma. That day, as Grace stood in line to check out, she noticed the woman in front of her. Young, maybe only 23 or 24. With a baby about 2 years old, sitting in the cart. The woman was counting the cash in her wallet with trembling hands, her face going pale when she realized she didn't have enough. I am short $3, she said to Betty, her voice breaking. I will put the formula back. Grace stood there, and in that instant, it was as if she were looking at herself from 3 months earlier. The young mother with cheeks burning in shame, the small child with innocent eyes, Clear's throat, and the milk about to be taken away. Grace stepped forward before she even had time to think. Don't, Grace said, and the word left her mouth as naturally, as if it had been waiting there for 3 months. She placed a $20 bill on the counter. Pay for everything for her. Keep the change. The young woman turned and stared at Grace with wide eyes, exactly the way Grace had looked at Marcus that night. But why? You don't even know me. Grace smiled and she felt tears rise in her eyes because someone did this for me when I needed it most. And he told me I didn't have to repay him. I only had to pass it on. She glanced at Emma, her daughter standing beside her, watching with shining eyes. This is the lesson I want my daughter to learn. That kindness never disappears. It only gets passed from one person to another. Like ripples spreading across the surface of a lake. The young woman began to cry and she threw her arms around Grace as if she were hugging family she had not seen in years. Behind the counter, Betty wiped her eyes with her apron and smiled, satisfied. This little store had witnessed a miracle 3 months earlier. And now it was watching that miracle be reborn. As Grace led Emma out of the supermarket, the little girl looked up at her mother and asked, Mom, did you just do what the angel man did? Grace smiled and squeezed her daughter's hand. Yes, sweetheart. I am learning how to be someone's angel. A week after that afternoon at Henderson's supermarket, Grace took Emma to the park near their new apartment. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon. Yellow leaves drifted down onto the winding paths, and the laughter of children echoed everywhere. Emma ran straight to the swings, her blonde hair flying in the wind, her bright laughter ringing like bells. Grace sat on a stone bench nearby, watching her daughter play with a look full of love and quiet satisfaction. Life was finally good, and she felt grateful for every small moment like this. "Do you mind if I sit here?" The familiar voice made Grace look up, and her heart seemed to miss a beat when she saw Marcus Blackwood standing there. He wore a simple coat instead of the expensive suit she was used to seeing. And on his face was a gentle smile she had never seen before. "Marcus," Grace said, still stunned. "I didn't think I would see you again." "I was just passing by," he said, sitting down beside her. "And I saw you two here." They sat in silence for a while, both watching Emma swing happily back and forth. Then Grace spoke. "I never really had the chance to thank you properly for everything you have done for us." Marcus shook his head slightly. "I didn't do it to be thanked, Grace. I did it because it was the right thing." "I know," Grace said, her voice warm. "And that is exactly why it means so much. You didn't ask for anything back. You only gave with no expectation of return. That is the rarest kind of kindness in this world." Marcus went quiet for a moment, steel gray eyes drifting into the distance. "You know," he said at last, "for many years, I built my empire with ruthlessness and calculation. I thought power meant making people afraid. But that night in the supermarket, when I saw you and Emma, I remembered what my mother tried to teach me when I was small." He turned to Grace. "Real power is not in how many people you can make bow down. It is in how many people you can help stand back up." Just then, Emma spotted Marcus, hopped off the swing, and ran toward them on her little legs. "The angel man," she squealed, launching herself straight into Marcus' lap and hugging him tight. "You came to play with me." Marcus laughed, a warm, honest sound, and he gently rubbed the little girl's head. "I was only passing by, sweetheart. Are you doing well?" "I am doing great," Emma said, her eyes shining. "I drink milk every day like you told me. And Mommy says I am growing really fast." "I know," Marcus said softly. "You are becoming strong and smart and brave, just like I said." Emma hugged him for another moment, then ran back to the play area. Marcus watched her go, and there was a light in his eyes that had not been there before. "She is an amazing child," he said. "You are raising her well, Grace." Grace smiled. "Thank you, and thank you for giving us the chance to have this life." Marcus stood up, ready to leave. But before he walked away, he turned back to look at Grace one last time. "I heard you helped a young mother at the supermarket last week." Grace blinked, surprised. "You know about that?" "I know many things," Marcus said with a small smile. "And I'm glad you did it. You understood the most important thing." He paused. And when he spoke again, his voice carried a deep warmth. "Kindness never disappears, Grace. It only gets passed from one person to another, like ripples across the surface of a lake. And each small ripple can change an entire ocean." Then he walked away, leaving Grace sitting on the stone bench, watching his figure fade behind the trees. She knew they might not see each other often. But that didn't matter. What mattered was what he had taught her and how she would pass that lesson on to Emma and to everyone she met along the road of her life. It had all begun with 3 simple words. "I don't have enough money." And everything changed because of one single word, don't. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to fight or to conquer. Sometimes it is simply to see someone struggling and say, "Don't worry, let me help." This story teaches us that kindness is the strongest kind of power in the world. It can change one person's life. And from there, it can spread and change the whole world. You don't have to be as rich as Marcus Blackwood to do good. You only need a heart that cares and the willingness to act when you see someone who needs help. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share this video to spread the message of kindness to more people. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss stories like this each day. We would love to know how you feel about this story. Did it remind you of someone in real life? Have you ever received help from a stranger? Or have you ever been the one who helped someone asking for nothing in return? Share your story in the comments below. We want to hear what is in your heart. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.